Welcome to The Outsider Philosopher. On this channel, I share my philosophical view from an outsider's perspective. I don't know if you know who Peter Zeihan is. If you don't, I highly recommend that you check him out. He's the best of what YouTube has to offer. He's a geopolitical strategist who shares nearly daily updates on current events from his perspective as somebody who's studied global affairs for 25 years. He's the guy that can put together all of the puzzle pieces. And I'm a big fan of his, but recently I've had a hard time clicking on his thumbnails because I've found them too sanguine in light of the emergency that we are living under. Today is March 8th, March 9th, and we are, 2 months into the Trump administration, and every move he is making is perfectly predicted by the idea that he is a Russian agent, that the Russians have compromise on him that's so great that it could ruin him to the extent that he is not an equal player. He is being told what to do, and this is a Russian playbook that we are watching unfold. This is, a week out now from the hit job on Zelensky in the White House, which they consciously did. The plan was to put Zelensky on the hot seat and say that they can't do business with him. And then, just days later, not only did they cut all military aid to Ukraine, but they cut military intelligence to Ukraine, right? I'm sick and tired of people playing into the plausible deniability, right? Taking whatever carrot that they offer and say, oh, well, that's because MAGA wants to save money on blah, blah, blah. It costs us almost nothing to share military intelligence with the Ukrainians. And we cut that off, and now Ukrainian civilians have been slaughtered because they couldn't see the bombs coming, they couldn't see the missiles coming, and they couldn't interdict them. So Trump has killed Ukrainian civilians. He's killed Ukrainian women and children. For what? What have the Russians given up? This is something I've been thinking about, and I've been glad to actually hear it coming from the mouths of other people. But if Trump were a Russian agent, what more could he be doing? The idea that Trump is a Russian agent perfectly predicts everything that has happened and will happen. And so I was watching Peter Zeihan today, and I was going to share a clip with him, but my computer's just not cooperating. But even Peter Zeihan, who, you know, is tries to be as level-headed and middle of the road as possible, says that the only thing that explains everything that Trump has done to stab the Ukrainians in the back and to weaken our defenses against the Russians is that the Russians are calling the shots. And so this is what we need to wake up to. This is what we need to say loudly and clearly. This is Christopher Steele's book, Unredacted. It came out over the like in October and just did not get the coverage in the press that it deserved. Christopher Steele was the highly regarded British spy who was responsible for the Steele dossier, which, among other things, launched the Mueller investigation. And it's one of those things where I find myself out of step with like the general consciousness. People, even, strong MAGA critics, even anti-Trumpers, even the strongest Ukrainian voices here in America are still reticent to say that the Steele dossier is real. And I don't understand that. I guess it's, people were just so disappointed by the Mueller report. I don't know what they expected Robert Mueller would have. Like he's got the keys to the Kremlin and he could just go in and get all the smoking guns. But the Steele dossier came out 8 years ago, and it perfectly predicts all of the moves that Trump has made. And it's just a basic bedrock of science. The theory that best predicts behavior is the correct theory. And the theory that the Russians have compromised on Trump that is so bad that it would destroy him is the theory that best predicts everything that has happened since he's re entered the White House. And so on this, extremely small channel, all I can do is, as an American, I feel compelled to speak up and say what should be obvious to everyone else, which is Trump is not just an asset. Trump, it's not just that he's a sycophant of Putin, that he wants to be like Putin, all of these plausible deniabilities. No, Trump is the greatest traitor. Trump is right now committing the greatest act of treason that has ever been committed in America because he's a knowing and willing agent of the Russians. He knows, right? This is the P tape, and everybody, just the grossness of it plays into Trump's favor because nobody wants to be associated with that. But that's Trump's grossness. That's not our grossness. The P tape, or perhaps something even worse. So if you don't know what the P tape is, the allegation is that in 2012, Trump was in the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow, and this is the place where the FSB, the former KGB, takes American businessmen, sends prostitutes at them, takes them up into the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow, and they secretly videotape acts of depravity. And apparently, Trump had the hookers pee on the bed of the Obamas. And if they have that on tape, even now, that's so damaging that Trump would be willing to go to any length to keep that from coming out. And people are afraid to talk about that. And it's not like it's been debunked. All that happened in the Mueller report was that he lacked anything that he could prosecute on. But we all know, I was arguing with a good friend of mine that unfortunately went MAGA. And, he was saying, well, they didn't find any proof. And it's like, look, O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murder, but we all know he killed Nicole Brown. We all know he killed Ronald Goldman, right? So just because Mueller didn't have anything that he could prosecute on doesn't mean that the Steele dossier was debunked. And now, if you accept that the Steele dossier is true, you can see that it perfectly predicts everything that's happening. So I wanted to include that clip of Peter Zeihan, but just mostly I just wanted to point out that even Peter Zeihan is being driven by the facts to the conclusion that the Russians are in the White House and that they're calling the shots. And not just with the awful betrayal of Ukraine and the awful treatment of Zelensky, but recently Peter Hegseth, was in the last week, announced that we're no longer doing offensive cyber operations against Russia. Like what? Excuse me, what? So cyber offensive operations are the teams within the intelligence agencies that probe Russian cyber defenses and plan future attacks so that we can retaliate when they attack against us. And they do it all the time. These things take months to plan. And if we let down, that would be like we're turning off all our nuclear weapons. I mean, sure, that sounds great. We want to be, against nuclear war, but until the Russians put down their nuclear weapons, no way. And so until the Russians do what? What did we get in return for that? Right? We got nothing. Pam Bondi is closing down the units that investigate foreign influence and corruption. Really important news story from last year where Tenant Media, right? I'm here on YouTube. So Tenant Media was this media company that was behind the likes of Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson was caught dead to rights. Nobody denied that this happened, taking $10 million from the Russians to spew Russian propaganda. Pam Bondi has not only shut that investigation down, but she's fired those investigators. So the amount of collusion, the amount of obvious steps that the Trump administration is taking to do Russian bidding is just undeniable. And the only thing that explains it is that the Christopher Steele dossier, pick up the book, just Google it, just go to the Wikipedia page, right? Either Christopher Steele is telling the truth or Trump is telling the truth. And Christopher Steele was one of Britain's, our closest allies, top spies. This is a guy who was in the Soviet Union for the fall of the Soviet Union. He read Tolstoy in the original Russian. He paid a huge personal and professional price for sharing intelligence with the American administration that he didn't have to, right? Follow the money means follow the motivation. Sometimes it means follow the opposite of that. When somebody makes a huge sacrifice and gets no personal benefit from them, that's a strong indication that they're doing the right thing, right? So Christopher Steele, who, by the way, his methods that he used to uncover this possible compromise on Trump, probable, I'm calling it a fact, actual compromise on Trump, is the same methods and techniques that he used to uncover massive corruption at FIFA. So here you have this accomplished spy who paid a huge personal price for sharing this information on one hand, and you've got Trump who cheats on his multiple wives with multiple porn stars and lies about it multiple times on the other. And it's one or the other is telling the truth. And if Christopher Steele is telling the truth, then the chances are extraordinarily high that the Russians have compromised on Trump. And so they're the ones pulling the strings. And that perfectly predicts everything that we've seen and everything that we will see, right? And the theory that best predicts the behavior is the correct theory, right? And they're just things that are public knowledge. We know that Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign manager for his 2016 campaign, was the Russians' guy in Ukraine. He was supporting the corrupt president who the Ukrainian people stood up against in massive protests. People lost lives in those protests. There was over 100 people were killed in the Maidan Square protests, and then fled to Russia, where he still lives. Paul Manafort comes and becomes Trump's campaign manager. This is public knowledge. This is not conspiracy theory. Shares campaign data with the FSB, the former KGB. They put that to work in their bot farms to help Trump get elected. Now, we can argue whether or not that's sufficient to get Trump elected, but that's Trump willingly accepting a favor from the devil. And when you accept a favor from the devil is going to call on that favor. This is an administration, this is a regime, the Putin regime, that has kidnapped over 20,000 Ukrainian children, sent them to re-education camps, and then trafficked them to Russia. This is a regime that intentionally bombed a children's hospital in Kyiv on July 8th of last year. This is a regime that is setting up torture chambers in every town that they occupy. They are torturing civilians so badly that when they get out, they can't even speak. This is who Trump asked for a campaign favor from. That would be like, imagine Biden gets caught asking for favors from ISIS. That we're even having this conversation, that people are even so stubborn so deep into the Trump cult that they're not, just that alone should have been the end of it, on top of everything else that has happened. So, this is just one man's voice, just one man's channel. I know it's extraordinarily small, but what's going on right now is that the Russians have taken over the White House, and Trump is dismantling all of our guardrails, all of our defenses. He is going to flood the zone with Russian oligarchs, with Russian agents, and he has intentionally weakened our system to allow us to become corrupted by the Russians the way he himself has been corrupted by the Russians. And if we don't start saying that very clearly and loudly and draw a strong and bright line in our political discussion, we will go the way of the Russians. We will go the way of Eastern Europe. We will go the way of totalitarian dictatorships. And so, you know, that's my message for today. That's what I'm doing here as an American who sees very clearly what's happening. And, um, we all have to do what we can and open our eyes to what's right in front of us, or we will lose the democracy that we have had for over 200 years.